Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. So, today, as we continue to watch Russian forces continue to dismember and crush Ukrainian forces in the Kursk Oblast. This is continuing. The Russians have marshaled approximately 30 to 50,000 troops surrounding Ukrainian forces in Kursk. Whatever the operational goals of the Ukrainian military and those 8 to 11 combat brigades that launched this operation, whatever the original military goal was, has not been achieved. And at this point, we are unsure, we here at IMFAN are unsure of the purpose of these Ukrainian troops continuing to hunker down in these sunflower and potato fields, these open prairies in Kursk. Now, we have to ask why. We have to try to understand why the Ukrainian military is doing this. What is the purpose? What is the operational method to committing this amount of force to achieve so little, other than the perception by the mainstream media in the West that the Ukraine has invaded the Russian Federation? Outside of that, which is really kind of a false narrative, because many of the areas inside of what was the Ukraine, in all probability, is more important to the Russian Federation than this Kursk Oblast potato field. But how did we get here? Well, the answer to that is leadership, or lack thereof. And compounding that, incompetence. Look, before Volodymyr Zelenskyy was the El Presidente of the Ukraine, he was an actor that was best known as pretending to be the El Presidente of the Ukraine. Now, in the West, if you are an uninformed urbanite and you have a popular television show in which the lead actor is pretending to be the El Presidente, then because of the low intellect of the uninformed urbanite, if that person was to run for actual office, it's highly probable they would make inroads into that leadership quest. And that is exactly what happened with Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Was Volodymyr Zelenskyy qualified to be El Presidente of the Ukraine? No, absolutely not. I don't think anyone in their right mind is going to argue that issue. The only issue that Volodymyr Zelenskyy petitioned for his role as an actor and eventually El Presidente was fighting corruption. Now, how hard is that? How hard is that to run in a country that has the highest levels of corruption in all of Eastern Europe? Well, it's not very difficult. If you're in a popular television show who is allegedly fighting corruption, and you claim that you're going to actually become the next president of the Ukraine, and you're going to fight corruption there also, the uninformed urbanite is probably going to vote for you. And then you also have to look at the possibility of vote fraud, the likes of which is happening here in the ununited States of America. And now fast forward, he becomes El Presidente of the Ukraine. He's very popular. When you're popular, and then a war happens, which for a very short period of time makes you even more popular, you have Hollywood here in the United States fawning over you, telling you you can do no wrong, that you are the perfect leader, you are the beacon of democracy, even though you have suspended elections and the Constitution in your nation state. But hey, that's okay because you're at war, and we can suspend the Constitution, we can suspend elections in a democracy when we are at war, and you're that popular. At least there's a perception that you're that popular. Now, when you get that kind of adulation, if you get that kind of feedback, it eventually goes to your head. And that's what's happened with Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the power, the prestige of him being this perfect beacon of democracy has gone to his head. He does not believe he can make a bad decision. And in all probability, this Kursk incursion, this operation, was orchestrated within the civilian leadership, including Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and not the actual military leadership of the Ukraine. Look, we have seen already a fairly capable battlefield commander, operational commander, who understood the operational art of war, Zelenskyy. And because he butted heads with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Zelenskyy was removed from power. Now let's compare and contrast. Ask this question. Does Zelenskyy offer more in terms of skill set and knowledge than Volodymyr Zelenskyy in a time of war? Well, the answer is obvious. The answer is yes. Zelenskyy had higher competencies, had higher levels of skill set, have higher levels of understanding of the art of war than Volodymyr Zelenskyy. But because of this adulation, because Zelenskyy was put on this pedestal that went to his head, he believed he knew more than his supreme military commander, who has spent his whole life in the armed forces, not as an actor. Again, Zelenskyy's wheelhouse of knowledge in terms of military affairs, even political affairs, is very rudimentary. Very small. If you compare and contrast Zelenskyy with Zelenskyy, and yet Zelenskyy was driven out. He got the axe. So that right there should cause concern within the Ukraine. But it continues, and we continue to see disastrous operations like we're watching right now taking place in Kursk. Again, not sure where they're going with this. I have to tell you, it's probably going to go down as one of the most disastrous military operations in recent history. Absolutely, without a doubt. And now compounding that, you have Zelenskyy saying outright that to obtain a quote-unquote just peace in the Ukraine and Europe, all territories, including the Donbass, which was essentially in a state of civil war before the Russians even entered the Ukraine, the Crimea, which many would argue is rightfully part of the Russian Federation. It was and has been part of the Russian Federation throughout history longer than it has been part of the Ukraine. That's a fact. You can fact check that. Again, the Crimea has been part of the Russian Federation longer than it has been part of the Ukraine. Very short period of time. But those are the stipulations to even consider peace. All Russian forces out of the Donbass and all Russian forces out of Crimea. That is not going to happen, folks. And so the war will continue. Now, as we speak, Russian troops continue clearing operation in Kursk. Russian Spetsnaz and motorized infantry are conducting clearing operations, much like they have conducted clearing operations throughout the ongoing campaign. There continues to be envelopment operations ongoing with Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian battalions are being isolated, surrounded, and destroyed by Russian forces, by Russian glide bombs, by Russian heavy artillery. That is continuing. Now the question is where will be the next Russian offensive? Will it be to the southwest towards Orkiv and Zaporizhia? Will it be the continued, very successful Donbass offensive towards Kursk? Could it be somewhere else? Could something else occur prior or post collapse of the Kursk pocket? And believe me, this pocket is collapsing as we speak. And again, for the life of me, I do not understand why the Ukrainians are keeping forces in this area. It makes very, very little sense. None at all. Again, it has all the hallmarks of a political decision-making process and not a military thinking process. Would have Zelenskyy ordered such a campaign? And does the current Supreme Commander of Ukrainian forces have the authority to tell Volodymyr Zelenskyy, no, we're not going to do that? I'm not sure. I'm not sure at this point. You know, what do they say? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I do believe you are seeing that with Volodymyr Zelenskyy right now. It happens. He has absolute power. He has suspended the democratic process in the Ukraine. Not to say there was much of one there prior, but whatever beacon of democracy that once existed in the Ukraine is no longer there. There is no democracy. There is no democracy. There are roving bands of internal troops and police roaming around Kiev nightclubs looking to take into custody fighting-age males and send them to the front. Now, I don't know how sustainable that is in terms of the population eventually turning on the government, but I think we're getting close. Problem is, Volodymyr Zelenskyy is receiving massive amounts of military support from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Not just military support, not just intelligence support, but actual monetary support in terms of a cash cow. That ability to be able to control the purse strings, which Volodymyr Zelenskyy does, has a lot of power. And compounding that with his power with Hollywood and the Democratic Party here in the United States, the un-United States, that goes a long way. Now, because of these decisions by Volodymyr Zelenskyy, it will probably shorten the war. If military commanders were making the decisions in the ongoing conflict, the war will probably go on longer. But as Zelenskyy and the civilian leadership are making some of these decisions, it's probably going to shorten the conflict, especially this Kursk operation. This was, again, a utter fiasco and served really no purpose. Now, we're continuing to watch events on the ground very closely. We will continue to report. As always, thank you for joining us. More to come very, very soon. Have a good day.